like clock. I can't stop. Fuck around, make my 40 pop.
Boruto episode 164 was definitely a very good episode. The first thing that I do want to talk about is Deepa in this episode. And even though it was like the last 5 minutes of the episode, technically the last 3 minutes, because we do have to account for the ending, but regardless, that 3 minutes of Deepa was absolute monster. And I really loved it, man, because it really separated Deepa from a lot of the other villains that we did see in Boruto. Deepa in this episode looked absolutely savage. It looked like he had no regard for human life, and of course that's similar to what we've seen from him before, but now it's on a bigger scale, man, because he was actually fighting against actual ninjas, like legitimate ninjas, and they couldn't necessarily do anything against Deepa. But one of the things that I do want to point out is the fact that they didn't necessarily show Deepa fighting quote unquote serious. I really think that's going to be for an exact reason, mainly because I think that in the future Deepa is probably going to come up against a foe that's going to be extremely strong, and then we're going to actually get to see Deepa fight serious. Now I'm not necessarily going to say who I think he's probably going to fight serious in this video. I think that's a topic for a whole separate video, but I personally think that Deepa is definitely in the good graces of the Boruto writers. They waited this long to show us Deepa, and of course, even though he's still an anime only character, I think that he's going to be extremely important for the overall writers and the overall series of Boruto. Coming into this episode, one of my biggest fears is going to be the fact that Omoi might actually die in this episode, and it turns out that all of our fears and all of our concerns were put to rest in this episode. Omoi is actually going to be alive, thank God, and the way that they actually did it was very good in my opinion. Villains coming up with these types of scenarios aren't necessarily uncommon, where they actually do want to get some information, and because they actually gave their word to try to pry that information out of a couple of people, they actually do follow through with their word. Now, how Deepa killed Maru and Karu was absolutely insane. Like, he completely destroyed one of them, impaled him with his hand. The other one didn't even know what was happening. Like, he still had his eyes closed, hoping everything was going to be good, and he automatically just got impaled as well. That right there just shows you the speed of Deepa. But like, before anybody even knew anything, both of them were completely impaled and were dying and bleeding out on the floor. It was definitely a crazy scene though. I mean, Omoi is basically begging and pleading to these guys like, yo, do not snitch. Like, whatever you do not snitch. And them snitches, they basically Tekashi 6ix9ine it, man, because they just didn't even care. I was really surprised with Omoi in this episode. I just thought that him staring death in the face, he'd probably be a lot more nervous. He'd probably turn blue and start rambling on, but none of that happened. Like, Omoi was completely brave. His subordinates though, it wasn't a pretty sight. One of the popular criticisms for Deepa so far is the fact that he reminds a lot of people of Urashiki. One of the biggest comparisons is the fact that they're both anime only, and also it seems like they were both kind of playful. But in this situation, Deepa completely separated himself from Urashiki. I think at this particular point, Deepa has more bodies than Urashiki, and Deepa's only been in the anime for a couple of episodes, probably like 3 or 4 episodes. That right there is absolutely insane. And not only that, it just shows you his actual mean streak. Like, he doesn't necessarily care for human life. Urashiki, all he really wanted was chakra. That's not the case with Deepa. Deepa just wants to have quote unquote fun, and of course his fun is going to be at the expense of everybody else, man, because he's going to be taking their lives. Now, throughout the bulk of the episode, we got to see Team 7 plus Mujino versus Yuga and his forbidden jutsu. First thing that I do want to talk about with this situation is, of course, Mujino's character being extremely underrated. I think that as of right now, a lot of people automatically know his fate, man, because of the manga, but a lot of people aren't necessarily fully embracing his character. I actually think that Mujino can possibly be seen as like a Sasuke clone. Now, of course, I'm not saying that Mujino is anywhere close to Sasuke in terms of actual relative strength, but in terms of his personality and his ideology, it's extremely close to Sasuke. Similar to Sasuke, Mujino has not been in the Hidden Leaf Village for a very long time. A lot of his missions are outside of the Hidden Leaf Village, so because of that, he still has the old school ideology that definitely helps him out in situations like this. And I think just him being on this mission with Boruto, it kind of shows how Sasuke and Boruto would bond as well. Sasuke, just like Mujino, they're not the best at communicating, and Boruto said it multiple times throughout this episode. He just didn't like the way that Mujino talked to him. And I'm telling you, if he doesn't like the way that Mujino talks to him, imagine how Sasuke's going to talk to him when they actually inevitably do go on other missions together. Mujino also looked like the clear alpha in Team 7. I think that every single time that we want Konohamaru to step up, he's always overshadowed by somebody. And of course, we understand that Konohamaru, his ceiling was supposed to be Hokage. But if you did not know that and you were just watching this episode based off of just this episode, you would probably think that Mujino is probably like the Hokage's prodigy, and he'd probably be next up. He was giving Team 7 all of the orders, and most of his orders were absolutely correct. He knew exactly what to do. He diagnosed the situation. He also came up with the plan to pretty much save everybody from the forbidden jutsu. And not only that, he was willing to risk his own life to do so. Even though he said that he actually calculated the whole situation, he basically put his own life in the hands of Boruto, a gang that he doesn't even trust yet. That's insane. Now, specifically talking about Yuga in this episode, his forbidden jutsu, I personally thought it was going to be a lot closer to the Reaper Death Seal. Even though in this episode it was actually compared to the Reaper Death Seal, it was definitely different. I also seen a lot of people complaining about the design. My opinion on the situation, I thought that the design was definitely a little bit off. It could have definitely been a lot better. It could have definitely been a lot scary. The riders were definitely going for just having this big, huge stone-like figure, but it also moves extremely fast. I understand what the Boruto riders were kind of going for, but I think a lot of the Boruto fans out there would have probably been a lot more happier if this forbidden jutsu looked a lot more scary, possibly a lot more buffed, ripped, and just overall more menacing. Now, that is not to say that this current design is like a deal breaker. It didn't wreck the whole episode, and because it was an anime for only one episode, I think we can live with it. One of my biggest problems with it was the functionality part. Now, I understand. It was not a weak jutsu by any means. I thought it was a very good jutsu. But if we're talking about a forbidden jutsu, a jutsu that cost someone their lives, it should be a lot stronger than what it was. Now, don't get me wrong. As I said, it was a very strong jutsu. If it was a summoning jutsu, it would be a completely different story. That right there would definitely be something very strong. I honestly wouldn't have been surprised if this was Deepa's summoning jutsu. That's how much respect I have for this jutsu. But again, because it was a forbidden jutsu, it cost Yuga his life. I thought it should have been a little bit more overpowered. It was taken down by 3 Genins and 2 regular Jonins. But regardless, when we're talking about the ideology, I think the overall impact of this episode was the same on Boruto. I think what the writers were going for is the fact that the writers are trying to tell Boruto, like, missions aren't regular missions for other people out there. Some missions are actually life or death missions. If you guys do recall, at the start of the arc, Boruto was kind of complaining that he got a mission that was quote unquote boring. A lot of people out there literally have to put their lives on the line for their mission. Even though it might be boring, even though to them it might not seem like a big deal, they still have to put their lives on the line for the good of the mission. If you guys do recall, this arc started off with Boruto actually failing his overall mission. Boruto has to understand that he's currently in a sense of privilege right now, man, because if he fails that mission, it's no big deal. The only people that really takes the hit is the people who actually hired Boruto to do their mission. But in terms of these other people, there are multiple lives in their villages that could possibly be at stake if they do not retrieve this Hashirama cell, man, because it could possibly be a very good thing in defense of their own village against some of their own rivals out there. And we see it from the preview. In the next episode, they're going to dive a lot more deeper into that when they actually do confront the last 2 remaining quadruplets, and then they will actually explain the reason to why they are so easily apt to actually sacrifice their lives for the good of the mission. I think Boruto at that particular moment is probably going to get a very, very well needed character development moment. Now, I don't want to make it seem like Boruto doesn't know the difference between a regular mission and a mission that's this serious in terms of like retrieving the Hashirama cell. Boruto completely understands that there are different missions and different tiers of missions that he has to sacrifice for. But the overall question is Boruto willing to die for a mission such as this? For example, is Boruto willing, like if it actually came down to in this particular mission, is he willing to die to actually retrieve the Hashirama cell from the other 2 quadruplets? Of course, Boruto's been put in a life or death situation. Would Boruto willingly sacrifice his life for his own village? That's going to be the question. But let me know what you guys think about this episode in the comment section below. It's been your boy Baara B, and we out.
It's a knife.